Hi, everybody. Welcome to our latest Innovation Insights podcast, where I interview founders, investors, technologists, researchers, all talking about how we move innovation from the lab to the market. Innovation is so important in our world these days, and really, entrepreneurship is just as important. And without entrepreneurship, we're not going to get that innovation moving. So today I have an entrepreneur that I've known for quite a while. His name is Keith Alexis, and he's got some interesting stories. He's got a wonderful journey. So, Keith, I'll let you introduce yourself, tell the audience a little bit about who you are and what you're doing, and then we'll dive in with some questions.
Absolutely. Definitely. Thank you very much, Jay, and really appreciate being here and being friends and having a mentor like yourself for so long. So I actually my background is really started off in the OEM manufacturing world about 2.5 decades ago. We actually were building a product for 3Com and HP and a variety of OEM vendors, branded vendors. And one of the things in the last, I would say, 10 years, ever since we started talking, was about how do we use innovation for social good. And so not just connecting point A to point B. And so one of the things that we've done is come up with some unique solutions that are really focused on leveraging innovation for whether it's smart city technology, it's energy storage technology, and a couple of other things that we're currently doing today that then also have a net positive from a community perspective as well.
Awesome. So you've been involved in a number of different enterprises since I've known you. And, you did start out as kind of, I don't want to say engineer, but, a production person. You were implementing ideas.
Right.
And then you decided to take the leap and start your own company. I remember when we first started talking about it, we actually talked to some angel investors together and had some pretty remarkable journeys. And you were actually pretty successful. And then, you know, things happen. And can you tell me a little bit about your entrepreneurial journey? How you started, why you decided to go on your own, and some of the things that have happened.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we've had some interesting experiences that really has helped us. To your point, I started off more on the technical side of things, right? The product, the delivery, go to market, get to market strategies, as well as dealing with the branded company that we had here. Our parent company was out of Taiwan. And one of the things that really became evident to myself and a couple of the other managers was that we felt that there were parts of the market that simply wasn't being addressed. And we tried within the company to address those market segments and didn't feel the freedom to be able to do that effectively. So that's when we decided, hey, you know what? We've got enough capabilities that we could break out on our own and try to get this thing going ourselves. And we did. And initially there were, it always ends up being a lot more difficult than you initially think it would be. Right.
Yeah.
Right. It's a significant difference when you leave that big corporate name and then suddenly know, but the same people that were just talking to you a week ago, they're not taking your calls today, right? And so you had to prove yourself quite a bit. So we wound up having to, myself included, have to wear multiple hats. So you had to sort of move out from just that engineering to understanding sales a lot better, positioning, understanding the financial side of it, which was obviously becomes probably the most important side aside from the innovation side of things, because how do you fund it? How do you keep it going?
Yeah.
And all of those. And you always tend to, I would say, underestimate what you need probably by 2 to 3x at the end of the day. And so that became a big hurdle for us. And that hurdle hurt. At one point in time, we failed. We had to close things down and start over. And so this is actually the latest iteration of that journey. And we've learned from those mistakes, and now we think we're probably on a much stronger footing for accelerated growth as well.
Very interesting. So you came from the big corporate world and ventured off on your own and found out it wasn't quite as easy as maybe you thought it would be. It's like all entrepreneurs. We have this dream. Well, I've got this great product. If
Right.
I just build it, everyone's going to want it. And then you realize, well, the people that were talking to me, like you say, aren't taking my calls anymore. Could
Exactly.
you give us you said you had a couple of stumbles and you had to like relaunch the company. Can you tell us any ideas on how that happened and what you're going to do to avoid that again?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things we had two main issues. One was a technical issue, and then the other one was a financial issue. The bigger issue was the financial issue, where proving our model enabled us to get into a lot of projects, right? But that model was really running counter to the rest of the market segment. And what I mean by that is that in order to be a disruptor, we weren't just simply creating technology to deploy into smart city networks and things like that. We were also adjusting the business model. And so we were leveraging our OEM relationships so that we could deploy assets at a lower cost within a lot of these communities and then doing a revenue share and doing other things like that. And so it took a long time for investors to start to realize that we weren't necessarily targeting, the 60 to 80% margins. We were actually targeting, between 30 and 40%, but yet we had longer term relationships with these cities. So we were looking at revenue gains and profitability over 8 to 10 year span as opposed to a 2 to 5 year span.
Mm.
And that took some adjusting and convincing on the investment side, and we simply ran out of the dollars needed to make that happen. On the technical side of things, what also happened, we then ran into supply chain issues, because of COVID, increase in costs, and because we were already operating on a very slim margin, that created the sort of the second lever that created that change. Now, interestingly enough, from a consumer perspective, when I say consumer, I mean small cities, the interest was still there. So we knew the demand and the problems that we were solving was viable, and we had sort of the whole MPV side of it. So we had validation. We just needed to restructure how our models in order to make sure that they worked.
Got it. So you had a product that was wanted. You had consumers that wanted the product. You just had to figure out the business model that it will allow you to deliver the product while maintaining some kind of profit margin while you're waiting for things to catch up over
Right.
time. Is that
Yeah.
right?
Exactly correct. And it's an interesting thing because over, my couple of decades in the industry, you see some phenomenal products that come that show up or you learn about those, but then they never really make it to market or they never really become successful. And it's not necessarily a lot of times because the market doesn't need it or that the product isn't viable. It's just simply how the entrepreneurial side of the business from a business perspective, right? The financing, the operational side of things, which again, because we kind of came from a big organization, you didn't really take that into consideration as strongly as we should have.
And what I've seen in a lot of companies is even though you're generating revenue and everything is looking good, you don't have the foresight to look 8, 9, 10 months down the road and realize that the capital is going to run out. You need to prepare ahead of time. And I've run into that personally with a business that I was involved in. So I can see that. One of the things I loved about your model, Keith, when we were talking is you were trying to really actually be disruptive. Your whole idea when you say smart cities, you're not talking about, like, well, you may be talking about automated traffic lights or, reducing congestion. But really, what I got from you early on was you wanted technology to reach the people that were underserved, that didn't have access. And you wanted to extend that last mile out to those people. Could you talk about that a little bit? Because I think that's really interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's one of the things from my perspective as far as being an entrepreneur, right? You have to have, regardless of the technology and these other things, you still have to have some level of passion for what you do. And that's definitely part of the sort of passion part of my project, right? And where we see today, even in dense populations where there are underconnected communities within that population, within those that, like even in Los Angeles where we are, there are so many cities and individuals that are underconnected, but also what we're seeing is a divide of quality. So the connectivity can reach you, but if you can't afford it, you really can't do much about it. Or if it's wireless, you're only getting 1 mega bandwidth, you really can't do much with that at the end of the day. And so how do you deploy assets into the community and then let those assets sort of like the new railroad you can then load anything on there. And so we focus predominantly, I'll say 90% of our business is focused on communities of about 100,000 population and below. And what we have found is a tremendous upwelling of support by those communities. I was just on the phone 20 minutes ago with a city in Arkansas. And right now we have 20 cities in Arkansas that have lined up in our funnel, and they are all under 20,000 population, and they complain about the exact same thing. The big networks, they literally go. There's one city where the fiber literally comes up to the city, and then they go around the city, and then they continue on to the big data centers. And so they're just ignored, right? And it's not nothing purposeful by the big guys. It's just simply there just aren't enough people there. And so how do you make a business model out of that? And by us now putting this unified solution together, where we have the private network, we have the cybersecurity tools, we have a micro data center, and we also then have the battery energy backup storage systems, so that any one of these communities can literally be offline and still be connected. Then it actually, when you start to aggregate all of these communities, it becomes a substantial number of residents that you're addressing at the end of the day. Just in Southern California, we're already contracted to connect between 10 and 20,000 residential homes in one city alone. And then 6 cities around that have already reached out to us. So there's clearly a need where they're not purposely being ignored, but it's simply a demand that's physically there that isn't being addressed.
So it's interesting because most people think innovation is like coming up with a new idea, but a lot of times it can be taking the existing idea and turning it on its head
Yep.
so that it actually reaches a population that has previously been ignored.
Yeah, absolutely correct. Absolutely correct. And how we see it, exactly to your point about turning it on its head, right? If based on the numbers, whether or not it's from the FCC or it's Microsoft or whomever it is, how many underconnected or unconnected folks there are here in the US, right? It can range anywhere from 10% of the population. I've heard even all the way up to 40% of the population. That's a huge number of people,
Yeah.
right? To not be connected effectively. And then when we think about how that plays into technology, where you have, the sort of herd mentality around AI and these AI models that are generated, if they're scouring the internet for answers, and 30 or 40% of your population is not contributing to those and to that information, how effective really are the AI models that we're building, right? And that's sort of the back end to some of the things that make us so viable, and some of our partnerships with Intel, in particularly Intel, on what we're doing, where they too are starting to look at the edge, these smaller networks. How does it compete with the bigger data centers, centralized data centers? Because if suddenly now you start connecting people that have not historically been connected, then you get different answers in your algorithms, in your LLMs, and and then you extrapolate that out to a global population. It's a significant shift, right? And so it can lead to other things at the end of the day by looking at it differently.
Nice. One of the things that I ask all of the entrepreneurs that come onto the show is if you could ask something of the audience, the people who are watching, and they could be founders, they could be investors, they could be service providers. It doesn't really matter. We hope everyone watches. But what would you ask as far as what kind of need does your company have right now where you could use some help?
So probably 3 things. One, we are looking for engagements. So, a lot of entrepreneurs are tied into their local chambers and their local city governments. And so if there is an opportunity for us to engage with them, we're more than happy to physically do that. 2, we're also always, again, looking for funding, right? We've learned our lesson. And so that has become a nonstop process. So
Yeah.
we have a very aggressive share program where people can come in and then they can exit rather quick as we win these cities. And then the third piece would be if anyone is interested in just having a technology conversation. We are, we believe technology is iterative. We haven't learned everything. We're teachable. And so we've gotten probably half of our projects because we've just simply sat with a city and said, what are the problems you're trying to solve, right? Let's not talk tech right now, right? And learn from them. And also we've just had a lot of interesting conversations with people that we haven't done business with, but we shared ideas. So I think those 3 things are paramount for us.
Sweet. Well, Like I told you when we started, we do a quick dive. I appreciate your being on the show, Keith, and we will
Absolutely.
be putting up a contact slide after this so people will be able to reach out to you when they
Please.
see this. I really appreciate your being on, and I really value our friendship over time and the ability to make things happen together.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Jay, and I definitely appreciate it and looking forward to an even longer friendship as well.
All right.
All
Bye,
right.
Keith.
Thank you. Bye.